The dust, kicked up by countless wagons, settled slowly on the mountain road. But Martha Kellaway notices something others miss. A small hand pressed against a wagon's canvas cover, fingers spread in what could be a ave or something far more desperate. Most folks traveling this remote stretch between settlements keep their eyes forward, focused on reaching safety before nightfall. But Martha has learned to watch for the subtle signs that trouble leaves behind. She's seen enough hardship in these mountains to recognize when someone needs help, even when they can't speak the words aloud. The little girl's pale face appears briefly at the wagon's edge before disappearing again, but not before Martha catches the fear in those young eyes. In a land where survival often depends on minding your own business, Martha faces a choice that will change two lives forever. What desperate secret is this child trying to communicate without words? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Martha Kellaway had lived in these Montana mountains long enough to trust her instincts, and right now, every fiber of her being screamed that something was terribly wrong with that wagon. At 45, she'd buried a husband, lost a daughter to fever, and delivered more babies than she could count in cabins scattered across this unforgiving terrain. The wilderness had taught her to read signs most folks missed. The way animals moved before a storm, the sound of genuine distress versus ordinary complaint, the difference between a child's wave and a desperate plea for help. She urged her mare closer to the ridge overlooking the narrow mountain pass, keeping the mysterious wagon in sight while maintaining enough distance to avoid detection. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rocky trail, and she knew the travelers would need to make camp soon or risk navigating treacherous switchbacks in darkness. The walking stick strapped to her saddle had belonged to her late husband, Samuel, hand-carved from mountain ash during their first winter together. He'd spent countless evenings by the fire, whittling away at the stubborn wood until it became a thing of beauty, smooth as river stone, topped with the carved head of an eagle. Martha had carried it everywhere since his passing 3 years ago, drawing strength from its solid weight and the memories it held. Now, watching that wagon disappear around a bend, she gripped the reins tighter and made a decision that would have made Samuel proud. Throughout their marriage, he'd never failed to stop for travelers in distress, never hesitated to share their meager supplies with families passing through. "Martha," he used to say, "in country this hard, we're all just one disaster away from needing help ourselves." The child's terrified eyes haunted her. In that brief glimpse, Martha had seen something that reminded her painfully of her own daughter, Emma. During her final illness, the same desperate awareness that outs were failing to protect her, the same silent pleading for someone to make things right. She knew the dangers of interfering in other people's business, especially out here where law was scarce, and justice often came at the end of a gun barrel. But she also knew the cost of turning away from suffering when you had the power to act. Martha had built a reputation throughout these mountains as someone who could be trusted in times of trouble. When Mary Henderson went into difficult labor during a blizzard, they'd sent for Martha. When the Carlson boy broke his leg in a mine accident, Martha had set the bone and nursed him back to health. When influenza swept through Pine Creek settlement, she'd worked for weeks without rest, saving more lives than the circuit doctor ever managed. The wagon tracks in the dust told their own story. 3 horses heavily loaded, moving faster than was safe on these mountain roads. No family traveling to New Homestead moved with such urgency, especially not with a young child aboard. Something was driving these travelers beyond normal caution, and Martha's growing suspicion was that whatever it was boded ill for the frightened little girl. As the sun began its descent behind the western peaks, Martha made her choice. She would follow that wagon at a careful distance, learn what she could about its occupants and their intentions, and if her fears proved justified, she would act. The mountains had taught her patience, but they'd also taught her that some situations couldn't wait for ideal circumstances. She touched Samuel's walking stick one more time, drawing courage from its familiar solidity, then guided her horse down the treacherous slope toward whatever waited in the growing shadows of the valley below. The worn leather saddlebags bouncing against her mare's flanks held everything Martha needed to survive in these mountains: dried herbs for fever and infection, clean bandages torn from old petticoats, needle and thread for wounds that wouldn't heal on their own, and a small bottle of laudanum for pain that went beyond endurance. Samuel had crafted these bags during their second year of marriage, tooling the leather with careful precision and reinforcing every seam. They'd served her well through countless emergencies, carrying hope and healing to isolated families who had nowhere else to turn. Now, as she followed the suspicious wagon through increasingly treacherous terrain, Martha checked her supplies with new urgency. Whatever lay ahead might require more than herbs and bandages to resolve. The trail wound through stands of lodgepole pine and across rocky outcroppings that offered perfect cover for observation. Martha had learned these paths during years of midwifery calls, memorizing every shortcut and shelter between settlements. Her knowledge of the terrain was proving invaluable now as she tracked the wagon without being detected. The late afternoon light filtered through the canopy, creating patches of deep shadow that helped conceal her movements. She could hear the wagon ahead, the creak of wooden wheels, the jingle of harness, occasional rough voices carried on the mountain wind. But something about those voices troubled her. There was no warmth in them, no patience or kindness that should mark adults traveling with a child. Martha urged her horse closer, using a parallel deer trail that ran 30 yards above the main road. From this vantage point, she could observe the wagon's occupants without risk of discovery. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. 3 men rode with the wagon, hard-faced strangers who moved with the alertness of people accustomed to violence. Their clothes were trail-worn but expensive, their weapons well-maintained and easily accessible. These weren't settlers or traders following normal routes to established communities. They had the look of men engaged in business that couldn't bear scrutiny. The child sat huddled in the wagon bed, barely visible beneath a dirty canvas tarp. When the wagon hit ruts in the road, Martha could see her small form being jolted mercilessly. No effort was made to cushion her ride or ensure her comfort. She was clearly cargo rather than passenger, and that realization sent cold anger through Martha's chest. One of the men rode alongside the wagon, close enough that Martha could hear fragments of conversation when the wind was right. "Make better time if we push through the night," he was saying. "The boss wants this delivered soon as possible. Delivered, not brought home safely or reunited with family." The word confirmed Martha's growing suspicion that this child was being transported against her will, possibly sold like livestock to whoever awaited their arrival. The terrain was growing more dangerous as evening approached. This section of mountain road was notorious for rock slides and sudden drop-offs. Local people avoided traveling it after dark, knowing that one misstep could send horse and rider tumbling into canyons that might never give up their dead. But the men with the wagon showed no signs of stopping to make camp. Martha realized they were heading toward Deadman's Pass, a treacherous stretch of trail that would take them over the divide and into the next valley. Once they crossed that pass, tracking them would become nearly impossible. The trail split in multiple directions on the far side, leading to mining camps, trading posts, and settlements where a frightened child could disappear forever. She had to act soon, but 3 armed men presented odds that even her determination couldn't overcome through direct confrontation. Martha needed strategy, not courage alone. Her years in these mountains had taught her that sometimes the terrain itself could be a powerful ally. The wagon rounded a bend ahead, temporarily disappearing from view. Martha urged her horse faster, using a shortcut she remembered from her early years in these mountains. If she could reach the next ridge before the wagon, she might find opportunity to intervene. The growing darkness that threatened the wagon's safe passage could work to her advantage if she planned carefully. Her saddlebags held more than medical supplies. They carried the accumulated wisdom of someone who'd learned to survive and help others survive in country that showed no mercy to the unprepared. Martha managed to position herself behind a cluster of boulders, overlooking the trail just as the wagon came into view again. The men had stopped to rest their horses and check their cargo, giving her the opportunity she needed to observe more closely. What she witnessed made her stomach clench with rage and determination. The child, she couldn't be more than 8 years old, sat trembling in the wagon bed, clutching something small and blue against her chest. Even from a distance, Martha could see the terror in the girl's posture, the way she flinched whenever one of the men approached. Her dress was torn and dirty, her hair matted, but she held herself with a dignity that spoke of better times and loving care. "Lucy, quit your sniveling," one of the men barked, reaching into the wagon to roughly adjust the rope securing their supplies. "We got 2 more days of travel, and I don't want to listen to your whimpering the whole way." Lucy. The child had a name now, which somehow made Martha's protective instincts even stronger. She watched as the little girl clutched what appeared to be a small wooden doll, holding it like a lifeline against the cruelty surrounding her. The largest of the 3 men, a bearded brute with scarred hands, pulled out a bottle and took a long drink before speaking. "Reminds me too much of what happened back at the homestead. Never figured on having to kill the whole family." Martha's blood went cold. These weren't just kidnappers, they were murderers who'd destroyed this child's entire world. "Wasn't supposed to go that way," replied another man, younger but no less vicious. "Boss just wanted the information about the mine claims, but when the father wouldn't talk, things got out of hand. Father put up more fight than expected." The bearded man continued. "By the time we convinced him to cooperate, everyone had seen too much. Couldn't leave witnesses." Martha pressed closer to the rocks, desperate to hear more while fighting the urge to charge down the slope and snatch Lucy away from these monsters. The child sat perfectly still, but Martha could see tears streaming down her dirty face. "What about the girl?" the youngest man asked. "She's seen our faces, knows our names, seems risky to keep her alive." The bearded leader laughed, a sound that held no warmth. "She's worth more alive than dead. Boss has buyers lined up for healthy young ones, especially pretty little girls like this one. Figure she'll bring enough to make this whole job profitable." The words hit Martha like physical blows. They were planning to sell Lucy into a life of unimaginable horror, and they spoke about it as casually as trading livestock. The child's wooden doll represented everything these men had already stolen from her: family, security, innocence, hope. "Besides," the leader continued, "she ain't going nowhere that she can cause us trouble. Where we're taking her, nobody asks questions about where children come from." Lucy shifted slightly in the wagon, and Martha caught a glimpse of the blue object she'd been clutching. It was a hair ribbon, faded and torn, probably the last connection to her murdered mother. The sight of it so small and precious amid such cruelty strengthened Martha's resolve beyond any doubt. The men began preparing to move again, clearly planning to travel through the night despite the dangers. Martha realized this might be her only chance to learn their destination and plan an intervention. "How much further to Broken Creek?" one man asked, as they secured their gear. "Should reach the trading post by tomorrow evening if we keep this pace," the leader replied. "Once we hand her over to Mackenzie's people, our job's done." Broken Creek. Martha knew the place, a rough settlement that served mining camps and asked no questions about anyone's business. If Lucy reached that destination, she would disappear forever into a network of criminals who traded in human misery. As the wagon lurched back into motion, Martha made her decision. She couldn't outfight 3 armed men in direct confrontation, but she knew these mountains better than any outsider ever could. The terrain between here and Broken Creek offered opportunities for someone with local knowledge and desperate determination. Lucy deserved better than the fate these men had planned for her. She deserved to grow up free, to heal from the trauma that had already been inflicted, to have someone fight for her when she couldn't fight for herself. Martha touched her saddlebags once more, then began planning how to turn the mountain wilderness into an ally in the battle for one small girl's life. Martha's fingers found the silver locket at her throat, a habit that had comforted her through 3 years of widowhood. Inside the tarnished oval was a daguerreotype of Emma, taken just months before the fever claimed her. The photographer had captured her daughter's gentle smile and bright eyes, preserving forever the child Martha had failed to save despite all her medical knowledge and desperate prayers. Now, watching Lucy's small form disappearing into the mountain shadows, Martha felt the familiar weight of that old failure pressing against her chest. But this time was different. This time she wasn't fighting disease or fate. She was confronting evil that could be stopped by human action and determination. The terrain ahead offered possibilities that began forming into a plan. She knew every trail, every shelter, every natural feature between here and Broken Creek. More importantly, she understood how weather moved through these mountains, how quickly conditions could change, and how to use the wilderness itself as a weapon against those who didn't respect its power. The wagon was heading toward Devil's Backbone, a narrow ridge trail that was treacherous, even in good conditions. In about 3 miles they would reach a section where the path hugged a cliff face with a steep drop into Bear Creek Canyon. If Martha could reach that point first and find a way to stop the wagon there, the isolation would work in her favor rather than theirs. She urged her mare along a parallel hunting trail that would put her ahead of the wagon's road. The horse was sure-footed and familiar with these paths, bred for mountain travel and trained to navigate difficult terrain without panicking. Martha had raised her from a foal, and they understood each other with the wordless communication that develops between creatures who depend on each other for survival. As she rode, Martha invented her options. She carried Samuel's old hunting rifle, though she'd never fired it at another human being. Her medical cholbes could be useful in unexpected ways. Laudanum could incapacitate someone if administered properly, and she had other substances that could cause disorientation or illness. Most importantly, she had knowledge of winter shelters and escape routes that could keep her and Lucy alive even if they had to flee into the wilderness. The locket bounced gently against her chest as her horse picked its way through the rocky terrain. Emma would be 11 now if she'd lived, probably helping with the garden and learning to read the signs that predicted weather changes. Martha had planned to teach her everything about surviving in these mountains, to pass on the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime spent in harmony with the wilderness. Perhaps saving Lucy was a chance to honor that interrupted legacy, to use her skills for the purpose she'd always intended, protecting and nurturing the next generation. The sun was setting behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Martha reached the overlook point just as full darkness began settling over the mountain. Below, she could see the flicker of a lantern marking the wagon's slow progress along the dangerous trail. They were making better time than she'd expected, which meant her window for action was narrowing. Once they passed through Devil's Backbone, the trail opened into easier terrain where pursuit and escape would become much more difficult. Martha secured her horse in a grove of aspens where it would be hidden, but could be reached quickly if needed. Then she began working her way down the steep slope toward the trail, carrying only essential supplies and Samuel's rifle. Her plan was simple but dangerous: create an obstacle that would force the men to stop, then use the confusion and darkness to extract Lucy before they could react effectively. The silver locket seemed to grow warmer against her skin as she moved through the shadows, as if Emma's spirit was offering encouragement for the battle ahead. Martha had spent 3 years wondering if she could have done something different, something more, to save her daughter's life. Tonight she would discover whether her skills and determination were enough to save someone else's child. Lucy was still clutching that wooden doll, still wearing the torn blue ribbon that connected her to murdered parents and a lost life. But she was also still alive, still fighting in her quiet way against the cruelty that surrounded her. That was enough hope to build a rescue on. Martha checked her rifle one final time and prepared to find out what one determined mountain woman could accomplish against impossible odds. Martha positioned herself behind a fallen pine tree that had crashed across the narrow trail during the previous winter's storms. The massive trunk created a natural barricade that would force the wagon to stop, giving her the confrontation she needed. As she waited in the darkness, her fingers closed around a rusty horseshoe, half buried in the forest debris, probably lost by some traveler months ago and forgotten, until this moment when it might serve as an improvised weapon. The sound of approaching wheels grew louder, accompanied by the harsh voices of men who showed no concern for the dangers of night travel in treacherous terrain. Martha pressed herself lower behind the fallen tree, rifle ready, but hoping she could resolve this without bloodshed. The horseshoe felt solid and reassuring in her left hand, a reminder that desperation could transform the most ordinary objects into tools of survival. "What in blazes is this?" The lead rider's voice carried clearly through the mountain air as his lantern illuminated the massive obstacle blocking their path. The wagon creaked to a halt, and Martha heard the men dismounting to assess the situation. This was her moment. She stood slowly, rifle trained on the group, her voice steady despite the fear threatening to choke her words. "That's far enough, gentlemen. I suggest you stop right where you are." The men spun toward her voice, hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. But Martha had chosen her position well. The fallen tree provided cover while giving her a clear view of all three men and the wagon, where Lucy huddled in terrified silence. "Who in hell are you, lady?" The bearded leader stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun butt. "This ain't your business. Move along and nobody gets hurt." "I'm making it my business," Martha replied, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "That child doesn't belong with you, and I'm not leaving without her." The men exchanged glances that spoke of shared violence and easy cruelty. These were people who'd solved problems with bullets and intimidation for so long that negotiation felt foreign and uncomfortable. "You picked the wrong fight, old woman," the youngest one sneered. "3 guns against 1 don't leave much room for argument." "Maybe not," Martha agreed, shifting her aim slightly, "but I know these mountains better than you ever will. Take 1 more step toward that gun, and I'll put a bullet through your knee. Then we'll see how well you handle this trail with a crippled partner." The threat carried weight because they all understood the truth behind it. In this wilderness, injury often meant death, and someone who knew the terrain held advantages that weapons alone couldn't overcome. "What do you want?" the leader asked, his tone shifting toward grudging respect. "The child. Release her to me, and you can continue on your way. Keep her, and I guarantee none of you will see Broken Creek alive." It was a bluff, but delivered with the conviction of someone who'd spent decades learning that confidence could be as powerful as bullets when survival was at stake. The standoff stretched taut as mountain air, each side measuring the other's resolve. Lucy had raised her head above the wagon's edge, her pale face visible in the lantern light. For the first time since Martha had spotted her desperate signal, the child showed signs of hope rather than resignation. "You're crazy if you think we're giving up valuable cargo for 1 old biddy with a rifle," the bearded man finally said, but his voice carried uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "That valuable cargo is a little girl whose family you murdered," Martha shot. "She has a name, Lucy, and she deserves better than whatever hell you're dragging her toward." The words hit their mark. All 3 men stiffened, realizing this wasn't a random encounter with an interfering stranger. This woman knew details about their business that could prove dangerous if shared with the wrong people. "How much do you know?" the leader asked quietly. "Enough to ensure that justice finds you eventually, whether I live through tonight or not," Martha replied. "But right now, I only care about that child's safety." The tension escalated when the youngest man made the mistake of trying to draw his weapon. Martha's rifle spoke before his gun cleared leather, the bullet shattering a rock inches from his feet and sending fragments stinging against his legs. "Next one goes center mass," she warned, already working the rifle's action to chamber another round. The rusty horseshoe remained ready in her other hand, a backup weapon that might prove useful if the confrontation turned to close combat. The mountains seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see which side would blink first. The first shot from the youngest man's gun splintered bark from the fallen tree just inches from Martha's head. She dove sideways, rolling behind a cluster of boulders as return fire erupted from all three men. Lucy's scream pierced the night air, a sound of pure terror that fueled Martha's determination more than any battle cry ever could. "Lucy, stay down," Martha shouted as she scrambled toward the wagon, using the rocky terrain and fallen timber for cover. The child had pressed herself flat against the wagon bed, still clutching the compass rose pendant that had belonged to her mother, a delicate silver piece that caught the lantern light like a tiny star in the darkness. The men had spread out, trying to flank her position while maintaining fire that kept her pinned down. But they were making the mistake of fighting on terrain they didn't understand, moving with city-bred carelessness through mountain wilderness that could kill the unwary as quickly as any bullet. Martha heard one of them curse as he stumbled into a hidden depression, his lantern crashing against rocks and plunging that section of the trail into darkness. She used the confusion to dash closer to the wagon, her heart pounding with the desperate rhythm of someone whose life had suddenly narrowed to a single crucial moment. Yet, to the horses, the bearded leader shouted, "We'll ride out and come back for the cargo later." The compass pendant around Lucy's neck seemed to catch what little starlight filtered through the pine canopy, reminding Martha of her own daughter's favorite necklace, a simple piece that had seemed to carry magical properties for a child who believed in guardian angels and happy endings. Lucy needed that same kind of magic now, the protection that came from adults willing to sacrifice everything for a child's safety. Martha reached the wagon's side just as the men began mounting their horses. She grabbed Lucy's small hand, feeling the child's desperate grip as they connected for the first time. "Can you ride?" Martha whispered urgently. Lucy nodded, her eyes wide with fear but bright with newfound hope. Together they slipped from the wagon as the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. The men had decided to run them down rather than continue the firefight, probably calculating that speed and momentum would overcome whatever advantages the mountain woman might possess. Martha's mare waited where she'd left her, trained to stand ground even when gunfire erupted nearby. She boosted Lucy onto the horse's back before swinging up behind her, feeling the child's small body trembling against her chest. "Hold tight to her mane," Martha instructed as they plunged into the forest, following deer trails that would be invisible to the pursuing men. Behind them, angry shouts and the crash of horses forcing their way through undergrowth marked their pursuers' clumsy attempts to follow. The terrain worked in their favor now. Martha knew every switchback, every hidden ravine, every shortcut that could put distance between them and immediate danger. But she also knew the men wouldn't give up easily. Lucy represented too much money, and they'd already committed too many crimes to worry about adding more violence to their account. They rode hard through stands of lodgepole pine and across rocky meadows where moonlight provided just enough illumination to avoid the worst obstacle. Lucy clutched the horse's mane with one hand, while her other held tight to the compass pendant, as if her mother's memory could guide them to safety. "Where are we going?" Lucy whispered, the first words Martha had heard her speak. "Somewhere safe," Martha replied, though she wasn't entirely sure where that might be. The nearest settlement was 2 days' ride, and the men chasing them would know the main trail. Their only hope lay in reaching one of the hidden shelters Martha had used during her years of traveling to remote medical emergencies. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter as their pursuers struggled with unfamiliar terrain in darkness. But Martha knew this advantage wouldn't last. Come morning, the men would be able to track them more effectively, and their superior numbers would tell in any prolonged chase. The compass pendant pressed against Lucy's small chest seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, a reminder of love that had been destroyed, but also of hope that might yet be preserved. Martha urged her horse faster through the mountain darkness, carrying a precious burden toward an uncertain but determined future. They had escaped the immediate trap, but the real test of survival was just beginning. The abandoned line cabin sat tucked into a grove of spruce trees, invisible from the main trail, but offering shelter that Martha had used during winter emergencies. She'd discovered it years ago while tracking a lost child through a blizzard, and since then had kept it stocked with basic supplies for situations exactly like this one. Martha helped Lucy down from the horse before leading the mare to a small lean-to that would hide her from casual observation. The child stood uncertainly in the clearing, her thin dress providing little protection against the mounting cold that came with elevation and darkness. Inside the cabin, Martha felt around until she found the oil lamp and matches she'd left on previous visits. Golden light revealed a single room with a stone fireplace, rough wooden furniture, and shelves holding preserved food and medical supplies. More importantly, quilted blankets hung on wooden pegs, including one her own mother had made decades ago, its pattern of interlocking rings still bright despite years of use. "Come here, child," Martha said gently, wrapping the heavy quilt around Lucy's trembling shoulders. The fabric still held traces of lavender sashes. Martha's mother had tucked between its layers, a scent that spoke of safety and feminine care in a world that had shown Lucy nothing but cruelty. Lucy sank onto a wooden chair, finally allowing herself to relax slightly for the first time since Martha had spotted her desperate signal. In the lamplight, the full extent of her ordeal became visible: bruises on her thin arms, cuts on her bare feet, and the hollow look of someone who'd seen too much violence for such a young age. "Are you hurt?" Martha asked, already reaching for her medical supplies. Lucy shook her head, though Martha could see that wasn't entirely true. The child was functioning despite her injuries, drawing on reserves of strength that shouldn't have been necessary for someone her age. "What's your full name, sweet?" "Lucy May Anderson," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible. "My papa was Thomas Anderson. We had a homestead near Willow Creek, and—" Her voice broke as memory overwhelmed her fragile composure. Martha knelt beside the chair, her hands gentle as she examined Lucy's injuries. "You don't have to tell me everything tonight, but I need to know, do you have family somewhere? People who might be looking for you?" "They killed everyone," Lucy said simply, the words carrying a weight that no child should have to bear. "Mama, Papa, my baby brother Jamie. They burned our house and took me because—" She paused, struggling with concepts too adult for her understanding. "Because they're evil men who do evil things," Martha finished firmly. "But they can't hurt you anymore. I won't let them." As Martha cleaned and bandaged Lucy's wounds, the child began talking in fragments, releasing pieces of trauma that had been locked inside her for days. The attackers had come looking for information about mining claims, believing Lucy's father had knowledge about valuable deposits in the area. When he'd refused to cooperate, violence had escalated until the entire family was dead, except for one small witness who might be valuable in other ways. "I hid the papers Papa wanted to protect," Lucy said suddenly, her hand moving to a small tear in her dress hem. "He told me to hide them where bad men couldn't find them, so I sewed them inside my dress." Martha realized the child had been carrying evidence of the criminal's activities, making her even more valuable and dangerous to the men pursuing them. Whatever those papers contained, they were worth killing for, and worth dying to protect. "You did exactly right," Martha assured her. "Your papa would be proud of how brave you've been." The quilt around Lucy's shoulders seemed to provide more than physical warmth. As Martha prepared a simple meal from the cabin supplies, she watched some of the tension leave the child's face. The familiar domestic routine of cooking and caring offered normalcy in a world that had turned violent and unpredictable. Outside, the mountain night was quiet, except for natural sounds: wind through pine branches, the distant call of an owl, the soft movement of small creatures in the underbrush. No sound of pursuit yet, though Martha knew their respite wouldn't last long. "Are we safe here?" Lucy asked as Martha tucked her into a rough wooden bunk, covered with soft blankets. "For tonight," Martha replied honestly. "Tomorrow we'll figure out how to get you somewhere permanently safe." As Lucy drifted towards sleep, still clutching her mother's compass pendant, Martha sat by the small fire and planned their next moves. They couldn't stay hidden forever, and the men chasing them wouldn't give up easily. But tonight, one small girl was warm and protected, and sometimes that was enough to build hope on. Martha woke to the sound of horses moving through the forest below their hiding place. She'd been sleeping lightly, one ear always tuned for danger. And the careful way these riders moved, told her everything she needed to know. The men had found their trail and were methodically searching every possible shelter. The brass bullet casing glinted in the early morning light as Martha retrieved it from where it had fallen during their hasty arrival the night before. One of their pursuers had obviously fired wildly during the chase, and the spent cartridge now served as evidence of how determined and violent these men truly were. Lucy stirred in her blankets as Martha moved quietly around the cabin, gathering supplies and preparing for another desperate flight. The child's face looked younger in sleep, temporarily free from the fear that had aged her beyond her years. But there was no time for rest now. "Lucy, we need to go," Martha whispered urgently. "They found us." The girl came fully awake instantly, the weariness of someone who'd learned that safety was always temporary. She rolled the precious quilt quickly and helped Martha pack their meager supplies without complaint or question. The brass casing went into Martha's pocket, physical proof of the violence they faced and the stakes involved in their flight. Through the cabin's single window, Martha could see movement among the trees, 3 riders picking their way carefully through the forest, studying the ground for tracks and examining every shadow that might conceal their quarry. They were closer than she'd hoped, but not close enough to spot the cabin yet. "There's a back way out," Martha explained as she shouldered her pack. "We'll take the horse and head for higher country. They won't expect us to go up instead of down." They slipped out the cabin's rear door and into the thick stand of spruce trees that had concealed their shelter. Martha's mare waited patiently, already saddled and ready for travel. The horse seemed to sense the urgency in the air, ears pricked forward, and muscles tense with readiness. As they mounted and began picking their way up the steep slope behind the cabin, Martha heard voices growing close. The men had found signs of their presence and were moving with increasing confidence toward what they thought was a trap, with no escape. "Split up," came the bearded leader's voice through the morning air. "She can't have gone far with the kids slowing her down. Check every building, every shelter, every place they might hole up." Martha urged her horse faster up the treacherous incline, trusting the animal's sure footing over terrain that would challenge even experienced mountain riders. Lucy clung to her waist, staying silent despite the fear that must be coursing through her small body. The brass bullet casing seemed to grow heavier in Martha's pocket as they climbed, a reminder that these weren't men who could be reasoned with or discouraged by obstacles. They'd already committed murder and kidnapping. Adding 2 more deaths to their account would cost them nothing in terms of conscience or consequence. Behind them, Martha heard the crash of splintering wood as the men kicked in the cabin door. Angry shouts followed as they discovered the still warm ashes in the fireplace and other signs of recent occupation. The discovery would fuel their determination and narrow the gap between pursuit and quarry. "Where are we going?" Lucy asked as they reached a rocky outcropping that offered temporary concealment. "Higher up," Martha replied, studying the terrain ahead. "There are places in these mountains where horses can't follow, where local knowledge matters more than numbers." The brass casing rattled softly against the other contents of her pocket as they resumed their climb. Each step took them further from civilization and deeper into wilderness that could kill the unprepared as efficiently as any bullet. But it also took them toward possible allies and resources that city men wouldn't understand or expect. The morning sun was climbing toward its zenith when Martha heard the sound she'd been dreading, hoofbeats on the rocky trail below, growing closer with each passing minute. Their pursuers had found the route and were gaining ground despite the difficult terrain. Lucy's grip tightened around Martha's waist as the sound of pursuit grew more distinct. The compass pendant pressed against the child's chest seemed inadequate protection against the violence that followed them through the mountain wilderness. "Hold on tight," Martha warned as she guided her horse toward an even steeper section of trail. "We're about to find out what these mountains can teach city men about respect." The Crow warriors appeared so silently that Martha's horse was the first to sense their presence, ears swiveling toward shadows that seemed empty until painted figures separated themselves from the pine trees. Martha's hand moved instinctively toward her rifle before she recognized the face of Joseph Broken Wing, a man she'd helped during a difficult winter 3 years earlier. "Mrs. Kellaway," he said simply, his English careful but clear. "You travel in dangerous company this morning." Behind him, two other warriors materialized from concealment, their faces painted for war and their weapons ready, but not threatening. Martha felt Lucy's grip tighten around her waist as the child took in the sight of men who looked unlike anyone she'd ever encountered. "Joseph," Martha replied with relief. She couldn't hide. "These are dangerous times. The men following us aren't friends to anyone in these mountains." Joseph nodded toward the beaded medicine pouch hanging from his belt, a gift from his grandmother that had supposedly saved his life during a blizzard when Martha's medical skills had failed to warm his frozen hands. He'd credited both her herbs and his sacred objects with his survival, creating a bond that transcended the usual tensions between white settlers and tribal peoples. "We have watched the three riders," Joseph continued. "They move like hunters stalking prey, but they hunt human prey. This is not acceptable in our territory." The other warriors moved closer, studying Lucy with expressions that mixed curiosity and protective concern. One of them, hardly older than a boy himself, spoke in rapid Crow to Joseph, who nodded thoughtfully. "Swift Arrow says the child carries the scent of violence and fear. He asks if she is family to you." "She is now," Martha replied without hesitation. "Her family was murdered by the men chasing us. They planned to sell her to people who would hurt her further." The warriors exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their understanding of such cruelty. They'd seen enough of white men's worst behaviors to recognize evil when it was described to them. "Joseph," Martha continued, "I helped your people when the spotted sickness came to your village. I ask for help now, not for myself, but for this child who has no one else." Joseph fingered the medicine pouch thoughtfully, remembering the fever that had threatened to kill half his band, until Martha arrived with cooling herbs and patient nursing. She'd worked alongside tribal healers, respecting their methods while contributing her own knowledge. "The three men carry good rifles and many bullets," Swift Arrow said in halting English. "But they do not know this country. They ride loud and leave trail like wounded buffalo." "They're following us up the mountain," Martha explained. "I was hoping to reach the high passes where horses couldn't follow, but they're gaining ground." Joseph smiled, an expression that held more warmth than humor. "Perhaps they need to learn that some trails lead nowhere good." Swift Arrow, "Take two others and show these men how easy it is to become lost in country they do not understand." The young warrior nodded eagerly, already planning mischief that would send their pursuers on a chase through deadfall and cliff faces that would test their determination without necessarily harming them permanently. "What about us?" Martha asked. "You will come to our camp," Joseph decided. "Grandmother Singing Crow will want to see the white medicine woman again, and the child needs rest and food before she can travel safely." Lucy had remained silent during this exchange, overwhelmed by the rapid change in their circumstance, but when Joseph dismounted and approached their horse, she didn't flinch away from his painted face or decorated buckskins. "You are safe now, little one," he told her gently. "My people understand what it means to have enemies destroy your family. We will not let harm come to you while you heal." The medicine pouch at Joseph's belt seemed to pulse with significance as he led them deeper into tribal territory. Martha understood that accepting this help meant entering a world governed by different rules and obligations, but also by fierce protective loyalty toward those accepted as allies. Behind them, Swift Arrow and his companions were already implementing their plan to confuse and mislead the pursuing men. The brass bullet casing in Martha's pocket felt less threatening now, surrounded by allies who understood warfare and survival in ways that city criminals never could. For the first time since spotting Lucy's desperate signal, Martha allowed herself to hope that they might not only survive this ordeal, but emerge from it stronger than before. Grandmother Singing Crow emerged from her lodge as their small procession entered the hidden valley where the Crow band had made their temporary camp. The elderly woman moved with the careful dignity of someone whose bones ached, but whose spirit remained unbroken. her weathered hands clutching a bundle of sage and sweetgrass that filled the air with cleansing smoke. Martha dismounted and helped Lucy down, watching as the child took in the sight of painted lodge covers, cooking fires, and people who lived in harmony with the mountain wilderness. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts, curious about the white woman and girl who'd arrived under such dramatic circumstances. "Grandmother," Joseph said respectfully in Crow, then switched to English for Martha's benefit. "This is the medicine woman who helped us during the winter sickness. She seeks protection for the Heil whose family was murdered by bad men." Singing Crow approached slowly, her dark eyes studying Lucy with the penetrating gaze of someone who'd seen enough of life to recognize trauma when it stood before her. The eagle feather, woven into her gray braids, caught the afternoon sunlight, marking her status as a respected elder and keeper of tribal wisdom. "Child has seen too much death," Singing Crow observed in careful English. "Eyes hold shadows that belong to warriors, not young girls." Lucy stood very still as the elderly woman circled her, chanting softly under her breath and waving the smoking herbs around them both. The ceremony felt foreign but not threatening, carrying undertones of protection and healing that transcended cultural differences. "What does she see?" Martha asked Joseph quietly. "Grandmother reads spirit wounds, not just body wounds," he explained. "She says the child's spirit has been torn by violence, but the center remains strong. With proper healing, she will survive this evil and grow into a powerful woman." Singing Crow completed her examination and nodded approvingly. "This one fights even when she cannot win. Good medicine for hard times." She turned to Martha with renewed interest. "You risk much for child, not your blood." She needed help, Martha replied simply. No one else was listening to her call for rescue. The elderly woman smiled, the expression transforming her weathered features with unexpected warmth. "Good answer. Come, we prepare for battle that may come to our valley." As the afternoon progressed, Martha learned that the tribal band had been watching the three men for several days, noting their violent behavior and disrespect for the mountain environment. Swift Arrow and his companions had already begun implementing their plan to lead the pursuers astray, but preparation for more serious confrontation continued throughout the camp. Women sharpened knives and gathered medicinal plants, while men checked weapons and planned defensive positions. But they also made space around their fires for Martha and Lucy, offering food and gentle acceptance that began healing wounds deeper than any physical injury. Lucy slowly relaxed as tribal children approached with shy curiosity, offering simple games and shared laughter that reminded her what childhood could be like when fear wasn't the dominant emotion. The eagle feather and Singing Crow's hair seemed to watch over these interactions, ensuring that healing could begin even amid preparations for violence. "The papers sewn in your dress," Martha said quietly to Lucy as they sat by one of the cooking fires. "We need to understand what they say, what made those men willing to kill your family." Lucy nodded and carefully tore open the hem of her dress, revealing several folded documents that her father had hidden just before the attack. The papers contained detailed maps of mining claims, assay reports showing significant gold deposits, and correspondence with territorial officials about land rights and water access. "Your father wasn't just a homesteader," Martha realized as she studied the documents. "He was surveying valuable mining territory. These papers could make someone very wealthy." Joseph examined the maps with interest, recognizing geographical features that fell within traditional tribal hunting grounds. "These marks show places sacred to our people," he pointed out. "White men make marks on paper, but they do not understand what the land means to those who lived here first." Singing Crow approached their discussion, the eagle feather in her hair catching firelight as evening settled over the valley. "Papers bring death," she observed matter-of-factly, "but also bring justice if used wisely." The elderly woman was right. The documents Lucy had risked everything to preserve contained evidence of criminal conspiracy that reached far beyond three violent men. Used properly, they could expose corruption and protect others from similar attacks. But first, they had to survive the night and the confrontation that morning would inevitably bring. Dawn came with the sound of gunfire echoing through the mountain valley as Swift Arrow and his warriors led the three pursuers into a carefully planned ambush. Martha woke to find Singing Crow already awake beside the dying fire, her weathered hands working to break the iron shackles that had been meant for Lucy's wrists and ankles. Their broken chain lay in pieces around the elderly woman's feet, each link severed with the methodical precision of someone who understood that destroying symbols of bondage required both strength and ceremony. The metal had been heated in the fire until it glowed red, then struck with sacred stones until it shattered completely. "Bad medicine," Singing Crow explained as she scattered the broken pieces. "These chains held spirits of many children who suffered. Now spirits are free to find peace." Lucy watched the ceremony with fascination rather than fear, recognizing instinctively that this destruction represented liberation from more than just physical restraint. The shackles had been intended to mark her as property, to reduce her humanity to commodity status. Their destruction restored her identity as a person worthy of protection and respect. The gunfire from the canyon grew more intense as Joseph's tactical plan unfolded. The three men had been lured into a box canyon, where their horses provided no advantage and their superior weapons were negated by the terrain. Martha could hear shouting and the echo of ricocheting bullets, but no screams of pain that would indicate serious casualties. "Are your warriors in danger?" Martha asked Joseph as he prepared to join the battle. "Swift Arrow knows these rocks better than white men know their own faces," Joseph replied confidently. "We fight to capture, not kill. Dead men cannot answer questions about who sent them." Martha understood the wisdom in this approach. The three men were obviously working for someone with money and influence, someone who could send more killers if these failed to return. Capturing them alive might provide information that could protect other families from similar attacks. Lucy picked up one of the broken chain links, studying its twisted metal with thoughtful concentration. "They put these on children like me." "Yes," Martha answered honestly, "but never again on you." The child threw the broken link into the fire, watching as it disappeared among the glowing coals. The gesture carried symbolic weight that impressed even Singing Crow, who nodded approvingly at this sign of Lucy's growing strength. As the morning progressed, the sounds of battle gradually shifted from intense gunfire to occasional shots and shouted commands. Joseph's warriors were methodically tightening their net, forcing the trapped men into impossible positions while avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. "They surrender now," Swift Arrow announced as he returned to camp with scratches on his arms, but triumph in his voice. 3 men, 3 horses, many weapons, all captured without killing. The prisoners were brought into the valley under heavy guard, their hands bound and their faces showing the defeat of men who'd underestimated their opponents completely. The bearded leader who'd spoken so casually about murdering Lucy's family now looked around nervously at the painted warriors who'd outsmarted him so thoroughly. Martha studied the captured men with satisfaction mixed with continued wariness. They represented immediate threat neutralized, but also evidence of larger conspiracy that needed to be exposed and defeated. "What do we do with them?" she asked Joseph. "First, they answer questions," Singing Crow interjected, approaching the prisoners with the broken chains in her hands. "They tell us who pays for child stealing, who gives orders for family killing." The elderly woman held up the shattered metal so the men could see what had become of their instruments of bondage. "Iron breaks when it serves evil purposes. Men break too, when they choose wrong path." Lucy stood beside Martha, no longer the terrified victim who'd signaled desperately from a wagon, but a survivor who'd found allies and protection. The transformation wasn't complete. Trauma that deep required years to heal properly, but the foundation for recovery had been established. The broken chains would be buried according to tribal custom, their evil influence neutralized by ceremony and earth. The men who'd carried them would face justice that combined both white and Indian concepts of appropriate punishment for their crimes. But first, they would reveal who'd sent them and why Lucy's family had been targeted for destruction. The papers hidden in her dress hem provided part of the answer, but the full conspiracy required confession from those who'd implemented the violence. Martha felt justice beginning to balance the scales that had been weighted so heavily against innocence and family protection. Singing Crow approached the wounded bearded leader with a bundle of mountain herbs in her weathered hands, the plants gathered at dawn when their healing properties were strongest. Despite his crimes, tribal custom demanded that injuries be treated even for enemies, though the medicine came with obligations and expectations that white men rarely understood. "Your shoulder bleeds too much," she observed, kneeling beside the man who'd spoken so casually about selling children into slavery. "Medicine stops bleeding, but also opens pathways for truth to flow." Martha watched this interaction with fascination, recognizing the elderly woman's wisdom in combining healing with interrogation. The herbs would indeed stop the bleeding from the bullet graze across the man's shoulder, but they would also create debt that could be leveraged for information. Lucy sat nearby, no longer hiding behind adults, but observing everything with the sharp attention of someone who needed to understand the adult world's complexities for her own survival. The broken chains had been ceremonially buried, but their symbolic destruction seemed to have freed something in the child's spirit as well. "I ain't telling you people nothing," the bearded man growled as Singing Crow cleaned his wound with practiced efficiency. "You will tell," she replied calmly, applying a poultice that would draw out infection while promoting healing. "Mountain herbs carry spirits of truth. They do not like men who profit from child suffering." Joseph approached with the documents Lucy had preserved, spreading them on a flat rock, where the captured men could see the evidence of their employer's larger conspiracy. The maps and correspondence painted a picture of systematic land grabbing that targeted families with valuable claims, using violence when legal methods failed. "Marcus Donnelly," Joseph read from one of the letters, "territorial representative and mining investor. This name appears on many papers. He hired you." The youngest of the three prisoners shifted uncomfortably, his resolve weakening under the combined pressure of defeat, injury, and growing realization that their employer had sent them into a trap they couldn't escape. "Donnelly promised us easy money," he finally admitted. "Said the Anderson family had information about gold deposits that belonged to him by rights. We were just supposed to convince them to cooperate by murdering parents and stealing children." Martha's voice carried the cold anger of someone who'd seen the results of such convincing. "Things got out of hand," the young man continued, avoiding eye contact with Lucy. "Anderson fought back harder than expected. By the time we got the information, too many people had seen our faces." Singing Crow continued her medical work, but Martha noticed the elderly woman's hands had grown more forceful as the confession revealed the calculated nature of the crimes. The healing herbs carried obligation, but they didn't require gentleness for those who showed no remorse. "Where were you taking the child?" Joseph pressed. "Broken Creek, trading post," the bearded leader finally answered, his voice weakened by blood loss and the strange effects of the mountain herbs. "Mackenzie runs girls through there to mining camps and railroad towns. Pays good money for young ones who won't be missed." Lucy's face went pale at this casual description of the fate that had awaited her, but she didn't look away or try to avoid hearing the truth. Martha recognized the courage in this response. The child was choosing to understand her enemies rather than hide from them. "How many other families has Donnelly targeted?" Martha asked. "We've been working for him 6 months, the youngest prisoner continued, his confession flowing more freely as the herbs took effect. "Probably 8 or 10 families pushed off valuable land. Most times they just took the money and moved on. Anderson was the first to fight back serious." The scope of the conspiracy was larger than Martha had imagined. Donnelly wasn't just a corrupt official taking advantage of individual opportunities. He was running a systematic operation that used violence to steal valuable mining claims from families who lacked the political connections to fight back. "Papers you carry prove many crimes," Singing Crow observed as she finished binding the man's wound. "But healing herbs also carry debt. You owe life payment now." Martha understood this concept from her previous interactions with tribal justice. The men's lives had been preserved through healing medicine, creating obligation that could be satisfied through cooperation with efforts to stop Donnelly's criminal enterprise. Lucy picked up one of the correspondence papers, studying the official letterhead with growing understanding. "He killed my family for money?" "Yes, child," Martha answered gently, "but now we have proof that can stop him from hurting other families." The healing bundle seemed to pulse with significance as justice began taking shape around them. The faded family photograph emerged from Lucy's dress pocket like a pressed flower, carefully preserved despite everything she'd endured. The image showed a happy family posed in front of their homestead: father, mother, baby brother, and Lucy herself, looking younger and unmarked by tragedy. Martha studied the faces, noting the resemblance between Lucy and the woman who must have been her mother. "Mama kept this in her Bible," Lucy explained, as she smoothed the creased edges. "She said it proved we were a real family, not just people who happened to live in the same house." Martha understood the child's need to preserve this evidence of love and belonging. The photograph represented everything the killers had tried to destroy: the bonds that made Lucy more than just another orphan to be sold and discarded. "Your mama was right," Martha said gently. "Family is about love, not just blood. And love like this doesn't die just because the people are gone." Joseph approached with news that changed their immediate situation dramatically. Swift Arrow found tracks of other riders, many horses, moving fast toward our valley. "Someone else searches for the prisoners we captured." This development worried Martha more than the original pursuit. If Donnelly had sent additional men to ensure his first team succeeded, they were facing organized criminal force rather than individual desperation. "How many riders?" she asked. "At least 6, maybe more. They move like soldiers, not like the 3 fools we captured. Someone with military training leads them." Singing Crow examined the photograph with interest, her weathered fingers tracing the family's faces as if reading their spirits through the image. "Strong medicine in this picture," she observed. "Love bonds that death cannot break completely." The elderly woman was right. Despite everything Lucy had lost, the photograph connected her to something larger than her current circumstances. It provided proof that she belonged somewhere, that people had loved her enough to preserve her image for the future. "We need to get you away from here," Martha told Lucy. "If more men are coming, this valley isn't safe anymore." But Joseph had different ideas about handling the threat. "My people have lived in these mountains for many generations. We know places where soldiers cannot follow, paths that lead to other valleys where our relatives camp." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. A young white woman rode into the valley under escort by tribal scouts, her clothes marking her as someone from town rather than wilderness. She dismounted near their group with the careful movements of someone unaccustomed to long rides. "I'm looking for Lucy Anderson," she announced, her voice carrying exhaustion and determination in equal measure. "I'm her aunt, Sarah Morrison. I came as soon as I heard what happened to my sister's family." Lucy stared at the stranger with mixture of hope and wariness. The photograph trembled in her small hands as she tried to reconcile this flesh-and-blood person with memories of relatives mentioned, but rarely seen. "How do we know you're really family?" Martha asked, protective instinct still sharp despite the woman's apparent sincerity. Sarah Morrison reached into her traveling bag and withdrew another photograph, this one showing 2 young women who were obviously sisters. One was clearly Lucy's mother, while the other bore strong resemblance to the woman claiming to be family. "Elizabeth was my younger sister," Sarah explained, tears threatening as she looked at Lucy. "We lived in different territories, but we wrote letters every month. Her last letter mentioned troubles with land disputes and men asking questions about mining claims." Lucy studied both photographs, comparing faces and trying to process this unexpected development. Martha watched the child's expression carefully, noting the cautious hope beginning to replace some of the defensive wariness. "You look like Mama," Lucy finally said, her voice small but no longer afraid. "You look like her too," Sarah replied, kneeling to Lucy's level. You have her eyes and her stubborn chin. She always said you were brave enough for anything. The reunion was tentative but real, creating new possibilities for Lucy's future that went beyond simple survival. But it also complicated their immediate situation. Protecting one person was difficult enough, but protecting two would require different strategies and greater risks. The men who killed your sister are still hunting Lucy, Martha warned Sarah. More are coming, probably with orders to eliminate any witnesses to their crimes. Sarah Morrison's expression hardened with determination that reminded Martha strongly of Lucy's own courage. Then, we'd better make sure they don't succeed. Family connections were proving stronger than criminal threats, but the real test lay ahead. Sarah Morrison proved to be more capable than her town clothes suggested. She'd spent the past week tracking down every lead about her sister's murder, interviewing witnesses and gathering evidence that corroborated everything Lucy had experienced. More importantly, she brought official help in the form of territorial marshal credentials and federal backing for their case against Donnelly's criminal enterprise. The hand-sewn dress she'd brought for Lucy was beautiful in its simplicity, blue calico with tiny white flowers, made with the loving precision of someone who understood a child's need for pretty things, even in difficult times. As Lucy changed into clean clothes that actually fit her small frame, Martha watched years of tension begin leaving the child's shoulders. "Your mama taught me to sew when we were girls," Sarah explained, as she helped Lucy with the dress buttons. "She always said that making beautiful things was a way of fighting back against ugliness in the world." Lucy studied her reflection in Sarah's small traveling mirror, barely recognizing the clean, properly dressed child looking back at her. The transformation went deeper than simple clothing. She was beginning to look like someone who belonged to a family again, rather than cargo to be transported and sold. "The federal marshals are 2 days behind me," Sarah continued, addressing Martha and Joseph. "But they're bringing enough men to arrest Donnelly and his entire organization. We just need to keep Lucy safe until they arrive." This news changed their tactical situation dramatically. Instead of simply trying to escape and hide, they now had the option of holding their position until official help arrived. But it also meant surviving whatever force Donnelly had sent to eliminate witnesses and recover his captured men. Singing Crow examined Lucy's transformation with approval, noting how proper clothing and family connection were restoring the child's sense of identity and worth. "Spirit healing begins with recognition of true self," she observed. "Child remembers who she was before evil touched her life." The elderly woman was right. Lucy was beginning to carry herself differently, speaking with more confidence and showing flashes of personality that had been buried under layers of trauma and survival instinct. Joseph returned from scouting with concerning news about their immediate situation. "The riders have found our valley. 8 men with good weapons and military organization. They're making camp at the valley entrance, probably planning to attack at first light." This force was significantly more dangerous than the 3 bumbling criminals they'd already captured. Someone with real tactical knowledge was leading this group, and they'd come prepared for extended confrontation rather than simple intimidation. "Can we get past them?" Martha asked. "Not without fighting," Joseph replied. "They've positioned themselves to control the only safe way out of the valley. Other paths lead through country too dangerous for children and people unfamiliar with mountain travel." Sarah studied the tactical situation with surprising competence for someone Martha had assumed was just a concerned relative. "I brought more than just clothes and family connection," she admitted, opening her traveling bag to reveal a badge and official document. "I'm a Pinkerton detective, assigned to investigate the territorial corruption that's been destroying homestead families." This revelation changed everything Martha thought she knew about their situation. Sarah Morrison wasn't just Lucy's aunt. She was a professional investigator who'd been tracking Donnelly's criminal enterprise for months. "Elizabeth wrote to me about the pressure your family was facing," Sarah explained to Lucy. "When her letters stopped coming, I knew something terrible had happened. The territorial governor authorized my investigation after 3 other families disappeared under similar circumstances." Lucy processed this information with the careful attention of someone learning that adults could be more complex than they initially appeared. Her aunt was both family and official representative of justice, someone who combined personal love with professional competence. "What's your plan?" Martha asked, recognizing that Sarah's training and authority might provide options she hadn't considered. "We hold this position until the federal marshals arrive," Sarah replied with confidence that impressed even Joseph. "The valley is defensible. We have prisoners who can testify against Donnelly, and we have evidence that will convict the entire organization." The blue calico dress seemed to symbolize Lucy's transformation from victim to protected family member, from cargo to person with rights and advocates willing to fight for her safety. But the real test of this new situation would come with tomorrow's sunrise, when professional criminals discovered that their easy targets had become a fortress defended by people who understood both justice and warfare. Lucy's first letter lay on a piece of bark, carefully written with charcoal from the fire and addressed to Martha, with the painstaking penmanship of someone newly learning to write. The words were simple, but profound. "Dear Miss Kellaway, thank you for hearing my call for help when nobody else would listen. You saved my life and gave me back my family. I will remember your courage always. Your friend, Lucy May Anderson." Martha read the short message 3 times, each reading revealing new depths of meaning in the child's careful words. The letter represented not just gratitude, but evidence of Lucy's remarkable recovery from trauma that could have destroyed her spirit permanently. The battle preparations around them had intensified as Joseph's warriors and Sarah's law enforcement training combined to create defensive positions throughout the valley. But Martha found herself focusing on smaller signs of healing and hope. The way Lucy now walked upright instead of hunched with fear, how she'd begun asking questions about the future instead of just surviving each moment. "Can you teach me to read better?" Lucy asked as she watched Martha examining the letter. "Aunt Sarah says education is the best protection against people who want to take advantage of children." "Of course," Martha replied, touched by the child's determination to grow stronger rather than simply recover from weakness. "Your mama would be proud of how hard you're working to learn." Sarah approached their small group with tactical updates that mixed professional assessment with personal concern. "The men outside the valley are definitely Donnelly's people, but they're waiting for something. My guess is they're expecting reinforcements or new orders." This delay gave their defenders more time to prepare, but it also suggested that Donnelly's criminal enterprise was larger and better organized than anyone had realized. The territorial corruption ran deeper than isolated incidents of violence against homestead families. Lucy's letter writing had been inspired by watching Sarah correspond with federal authorities, sending coded messages that would bring help while avoiding interception by Donnelly's people. The child was learning that words could be weapons as powerful as guns when used by people who understood legal and political systems. "What happens after this is over?" Lucy asked, her question addressing fears that went beyond immediate physical danger. "Will I stay with Aunt Sarah? Will you visit us?" Martha realized the child was beginning to think about life beyond survival, planning for a future that included education, family relationships, and normal childhood experiences. This psychological healing was perhaps more important than any physical protection they could provide. "You'll stay with family who loves you," Martha assured her. "And yes, I'll visit often. Once this business with Donnelly is finished, there will be time for normal things like school and friends and learning about the world." Singing Crow examined Lucy's letter with the same careful attention she'd given to healing herbs and ceremonial preparations. "Words carry spirit power," she observed. "This child learns to make medicine with writing, to heal wounds that guns cannot touch." The elderly woman understood something profound about Lucy's letter writing by expressing gratitude and hope instead of anger and despair. The child was choosing healing over bitterness, connection over isolations. Joseph returned from his latest scouting expedition with news that confirmed Sarah's assessment. "The men are making permanent camp. They plan to wait us out, probably hoping we'll try to escape so they can hunt us in open country." This patience suggested military training and discipline that made their opponents more dangerous than simple criminals motivated by immediate profit. Someone with real tactical knowledge was directing this operation. "How long can we hold this position?" Martha asked. "Until the federal marshals arrive," Sarah replied confidently. We have water, food, defensive positions, and evidence that will convict everyone involved in this conspiracy. Time is on our side now. Lucy folded her letter carefully and tucked it into the pocket of her new dress, preserving her first renting expression of gratitude and hope. The act seemed to complete some internal process of transformation from victim to survivor to young person planning for the future. "Will you help me write letters to other families who've been hurt by bad men?" Lucy asked. "Maybe my words could help them feel less alone." Martha recognized the profound significance of this request. Lucy was choosing to use her traumatic experience as a foundation for helping others, rather than simply trying to forget what had happened to her. The handwritten letter represented proof that evil could wound, but not permanently destroy the human capacity for growth, connection, and hope. The community quilt began taking shape as women from the tribal band worked alongside Sarah and Martha to create something beautiful from scraps of fabric that told their collective story. Each square represented a different family, a different loss, a different triumph over circumstances that could have destroyed hope entirely. Lucy contributed her own square, a simple pattern in blue calico that matched her new dress, sewn with careful stitches that proved her determination to learn skills that connected her to generations of women who'd found strength in creating beauty despite hardship. "Mama taught me to sew when I was little," Lucy explained as she worked. "She said every stitch was like a prayer, asking God to bless whoever would use the finished thing." Martha watched the child's careful needlework with admiration, noting how the repetitive motion seemed to calm the anxiety that still surfaced when Lucy thought too deeply about recent events. The quilting provided productive focus for hands that needed something constructive to do while minds processed trauma. Singing Crow's contribution was the most elaborate, traditional tribal patterns that incorporated symbols of protection, healing, and spiritual strength. Her weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency, creating designs that carried meaning beyond simple decoration. "Each pattern tells story," she explained to Lucy, who watched with fascination. "This one speaks of children protected by ancestors. This one shows journey from darkness into light. Together, they make medicine for anyone who sleeps under this covering." The quilt was becoming more than bedding. It was a collaborative artwork that documented their shared experience while creating something that would provide comfort for years to come. Each woman's contribution reflected her personal history while contributing to a larger narrative of survival and community support. Sarah's squares told the story of her investigation and the families who'd been destroyed by Donnelly's greed. Her neat stitches created patterns that honored the dead, while celebrating the living who'd found courage to fight back against systematic corruption and violence. "The territorial governor is sending investigators to examine every land transaction Donnelly has influenced," Sarah reported as she worked. "Your father's papers are just the beginning, Lucy. We're going to uncover years of fraud and intimidation." This news represented justice extending far beyond their immediate situation. Other families would be protected. Other children would grow up safely because Lucy had preserved evidence and adults had chosen to listen when she called for help. The communal nature of the quilting drew other women into the project. Mothers who understood the fear of losing children, grandmothers who'd survived their own encounters with violence and displacement, young women learning that individual courage could create collective change. Martha found herself thinking about her own daughter Emma as she worked on her contribution to the quilt. The square she created honored Emma's memory while celebrating Lucy's survival, connecting past loss with present hope in patterns that spoke of continuity, despite tragedy. "What will happen to the quilt when it's finished?" Lucy asked. "It will travel," Singing Crow replied. "It will visit families who need reminding that they are not alone in their struggles. It will carry our combined medicine to places where healing is needed." The idea of the quilt as traveling comfort appealed to everyone involved in its creation. It would become a tangible reminder that individual acts of courage could inspire community action, that shared creation could transform personal trauma into collective strength. Joseph brought regular updates about the siege situation, but the women continued their work with calm determination that impressed even the seasoned warriors. They were creating something that would outlast the immediate danger, something that would tell their story long after the current crisis was resolved. The federal marshals should arrive tomorrow, Sarah announced as evening approached. When they do, we'll have enough evidence to shut down Donnelly's entire operation permanently. Lucy's stitches had grown more confident throughout the day, her square developing into something beautiful despite her limited experience with needlework. The pattern she'd chosen, interlocking circles representing unbroken family bonds, spoke to her determination to honor the past, while building toward the future. The community quilt represented proof that individual threads could be woven together to create something stronger and more beautiful than any single contribution. Like the story it documented, the quilt demonstrated that people who chose to support each other could overcome forces that seemed insurmountable when faced alone. As the women worked by firelight, their shared creation grew into a testament to the power of collective action and mutual aid in the face of evil that tried to isolate and destroy community bonds. The oak sapling stood no taller than Lucy's shoulder, but its roots had already begun reaching deep into the mountain soil, where they would anchor it against storms and seasons yet to come. Martha and Lucy planted it together on the anniversary of the battle that had changed both their lives, choosing a spot overlooking the valley where they'd found safety and justice. "This tree will grow long after we're gone," Martha explained, as they carefully packed earth around the young trunk. "Someday your children might play in its shade, and their children after them." Lucy patted the soil with gentle hands, understanding that they were creating something permanent to mark their temporary victory over forces that threatened innocent families. The tree represented hope extending far beyond their individual lifespans, growth that would continue long after their story became memory. 5 years had passed since Martha first spotted Lucy's desperate signal on the mountain road. The child had grown into a confident young woman who divided her time between education in town and visits to the mountain communities where she'd learned about courage and community support. Sarah had proved to be everything Lucy needed in a guardian, combining professional competence with personal love, providing structure while encouraging independence. Her work as a Pinkerton detective had expanded to focus specifically on protecting children from exploitation and trafficking, using the evidence they'd gathered to shut down criminal networks throughout the territory. "The school board approved my proposal," Lucy announced as they finished planting the tree. "Next year I'll start teaching reading and writing to children in remote settlements. Aunt Sarah says education is the best weapon against people who prey on the vulnerable." Martha felt profound satisfaction hearing these plans. Lucy had transformed her traumatic experience into determination to protect other children, using knowledge and skills as tools for creating positive change rather than simply recovering from past wounds. Singing Crow had lived to see the tree planted, though her health was failing as accumulated years caught up with weathered bones and tired spirits. She'd contributed blessing herbs to the planting ceremony, ensuring that the oak would carry spiritual protection as well as symbolic significance. "Good medicine," she'd observed, watching Lucy's careful attention to proper planting techniques. "Child who was saved becomes woman who saves others. Circle completes its." The elderly woman understood something profound about healing and growth that extended beyond individual recovery to community transformation. Lucy's survival had inspired changes that protected dozens of other families from similar attack. Joseph and his band had become unofficial protectors for isolated homesteads, using their mountain knowledge to watch for signs of trouble and intervene before violence could destroy more families. The territorial government had recognized their contribution by granting official status to their protective patrols. Martha's own life had found new purpose through her connection with Lucy and the extended community that had formed around their shared experience. She'd begun training younger women in midwifery and mountain medicine, ensuring that her accumulated knowledge would serve future generations. "Will you write more letters?" Martha asked as they stepped back to admire their planting work. "Every week," Lucy replied, Families still write to me when they're facing troubles. Sometimes just knowing that someone survived similar attacks gives them courage to keep fighting. The correspondence network Lucy had established was providing early warning about new threats while connecting isolated families with resources and support. Her letters had become a form of community medicine, healing wounds that individual effort couldn't address. Marcus Donnelly had died in territorial prison, his criminal enterprise dismantled and his associates scattered or imprisoned. But the systems Lucy and her allies had created continued protecting families from new threats that emerged as the territory developed and attracted people motivated by greed rather than community building. The oak sapling rustled in the mountain breeze, its leaves catching afternoon sunlight that painted the valley in shades of gold and green. The tree would grow slowly but steadily, requiring decades to reach full maturity, but promising to stand as monument to the power of individual courage supported by community action. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day? Lucy asked as they gathered their planting tools. Martha considered the question seriously, imagining the alternative timeline where she'd minded her own business and continued past without investigating the child's silent plea for help. I think about it sometimes, she admitted, but then I look at everything that grew from that one moment of choosing to act, and I know it was the most important decision I ever made. The planted oak would outlive them all, its growth marking time measured in generations rather than years, its presence a permanent reminder that individual choices could create lasting positive change in the world.